Welcome to M Go Bucks. We are here. We're live. It's a little love-hate relationship with Kirk Herbstreit and the Buckeyes as of late. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We talk a little bit about that big Tennessee Ohio State game that Ohio State finally showed up for. I don't know what happened. You guys are going to have to explain that to me. But yeah, we got a lot of awesome games coming up this weekend. We had a really, I thought it was an awesome slate of games this past weekend with the first ever 12-team playoff going. But in any case, Matt, Brian, how you guys doing? Start with you, Matt.
I am doing really well. I was just saying before the game, I was like, you know what? It's just multiple weeks of feeling terrible after losing to Michigan. I was like, I don't even think just a win is going to make me get over that. Like, it's going to have to be a blowout. That's what I said before the game. I was like, that's the only thing that can really, maybe like a blowout win over Tennessee and then, landing like 4 or 5 guys in the transfer portal. That might cheer me up a little bit. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Landing people in the portal left and right, destroyed Tennessee. It should have been even worse than it was. I mean, they had penalties that were, trying to keep them in the game. And then our backups were in almost the entire fourth quarter, which is unheard of. I mean, we barely have destroyed people like this in the regular season where Brian, do you ever remember a game besides Purdue that we had our backups in so soon?
Not in a game that mattered like this. I mean, it was crazy to see all 4 quarterbacks get a drive in the game at the end. And, they were playing true freshmen corners at the end. Bryce West, Aaron Scott, both got PBUs at the end of the game. I mean, that game was done as soon as they came out the way they did in the third quarter. And they've been the best third quarter team in the country all year long. But they finally got off to a decent start. I mean, that game, you really couldn't ask for a better, it was not perfect by any means. That's the crazy thing is it was the best game that Ohio State's put together on both sides of the ball, but they still had a lot of issues. I mean, they were not clean to start that game. They wasted a timeout early. They got a false start on that drive. They were kind of bailed out by the face mask penalty on a 3rd and 2 with a busted protection. But they just showed like they're going to be aggressive. They had a great game plan. I thought they had on both sides of the ball. And, it was Will Howard played, I thought, his worst game as a Buckeye against Michigan. And he played his best game as a Buckeye against Tennessee. And it makes a difference. I mean, we said that from the very beginning. This team is going to go as far as Will Howard is going to take them. And if he's going to play like that, they're a national title contender.
So I got to ask you guys this. As Buckeyes, you lost the Michigan game. I've probably talked to 10 Buckeye fans like since then. And I'd say the majority of them are like, yeah, we beat Tennessee, but I mean, I'm still not over Michigan. They're kind of taking maybe a cautious approach. I always thought that if Ohio State came out and trounced their first opponent, and it's Tennessee was a pretty good team. I mean, they're an SEC opponent. I always thought that Buckeyes would just kind of come back to life, and I think they have for the most part. But I'm still hearing a lot of negativity around losing the Michigan game, and I'm sure that's pretty normal. But how are you guys feeling as far as that goes? As far as like this season, I mean, you've got life after the Michigan game now. That's not something that you had in the past. Life after the Ohio State game. Michigan would lose, like your season's over. You're just waiting for some trashy bowl game. But now with this 12-team playoff, you've actually got some life. Like it matters now. It's not just one bowl game that you're going to be, playing for. It could be for all the marbles. And Ohio State's got a pretty hard schedule coming up. If they're going to get through this, they're going to get through Tennessee, Oregon, and then probably Georgia.
No, Texas.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Texas and then Georgia. Yeah. And then, wow.
I don't know.
I mean, holy
crap. Notre Dame.
I was going to say
maybe Notre Dame, but like, how are you guys feeling like after the Michigan game? Like, what's your level of like excitement, or how are you guys feeling as far as that Michigan game? Did that just basically make the Michigan game go away in your head?
Oh no. I mean, I was obviously, ready to fire Ryan Day, and that's still like on the table, depending on how we play from here on out. But I mean, it was just because there was really nothing else that we could think about at the time. Like we weren't landing any recruits. Oregon was landing all the transfer portal players, and the only thing that we could think about was how is Ryan Day ruining all this talent with terrible play calling against Michigan? Like I don't think that the guys held anything back. I mean, you could tell they were trying their best, and they didn't. Just I also think part of it was I can't imagine that Will Howard was just that bad outside of like being concussed early in that game. Like he did not look like he had the rest of the year. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, Michigan obviously played well on defense, but I have to think some of that has to be in his head rolling around a little bit. I mean, he got nailed early on in that game. But anyway, like since that loss, just being upset for a few weeks, and that's pretty much all everyone is talking about. Having the playoffs start really helped to, I mean, not let me forget it, but really helped to, get that disgusting taste out of your mouth a little bit, like where you're just finally able to move on and like look towards something else and be really excited for how well everyone played. I mean, especially the offensive line. I mean, I'm sure Brian would tell you the same thing, that like the most surprising thing about that whole game was we were hearing how this Tennessee defensive line is one of the best in the country. They had a top 4 scoring defense, top 4 total defense. And, the defensive ends were both had 90 PFF grades, and we're going to destroy our tackles. And we weren't going to be able to have any time to throw. And, I mean, we had Luke Montgomery come in and did fantastic. Integra was still up and down. He's still, like, by far the weak link on the whole team, really. But also our tight end came back, Kazmarek, and he did a good job blocking, too. Jelani Thurman knocked somebody out. I mean, like the tight ends, G. Scott had some nice catches. Between the blocking and the tight end play really helped out all around, like blocking and catching, just all around. The only thing that was sort of surprising that I didn't see from Tate at all, he only had like one catch the whole game, and he's been sort of an unheralded star the last several weeks. Like he's, everyone's double covering JJ and, putting extra coverage on Emeka, and Tate has been really balling out. But I'm surprised he only got one catch. But I mean, he had 311 yards passing, so he was able to get it to everyone else.
Yeah, how are you feeling, Brian? I got to hear. We haven't talked to you since I think before the Michigan-Ohio State game, so definitely.
Yeah, we did.
You.
We did the preview show, and then we didn't get a chance to. I wasn't in a headspace after that game to do a show that night. And it kind of like Matt said. I mean, I think you cannot. Nothing's going to erase that. You don't erase losing that game 4 years in a row, and then you add the COVID year on top of that, as the Michigan fans always add that calendar year. And it's been a long time, and you can't lose that game consistently. I mean, that, we talked about that. You end up with John Cooper 2.0, a guy who can put a team together, but can't win that game. You have to win that game. But at the same time, it's a different era. Now, back in the day, you had to win that game to have a chance to play for a national title. That's not the case anymore. And I think, I really feel like they almost built that game up too much in their own heads and played extremely tight, played conservatively, and Howard played like shit in that game. Whether he was hurt, whether he was concussed, whatever it was, he played like shit. I mean, the 2 interceptions were terrible. So for him to come out and be the highest graded PFF quarterback of the quarterfinal, or the first round games, it was outstanding, because there were some good quarterbacks in those games. I mean, when you got Quinn Ewers and you got Aller, he went out there and played better than all of them. And if they're playing loose, and I think the coaches had an absolutely killer game plan for Tennessee. Like, they knew what Tennessee's weaknesses were, and they were clearly the flats in the quick game, and they were not accounting for the running backs at all in coverage. And so, yeah, they hit the vertical shots, but if you go back and watch that, look how many quick, they had RPOs with screens built in, because with 2 tight ends, they had crossing routes. They had wheel routes. They had all kinds of stuff that was attacking the flats the whole time. And then they had a lot of so much eye candy in the run game that got the linebackers moving. I mean, they abused Tennessee's linebackers most of that game. And that set up their ability to hit shots. And I agree that Tate maybe didn't have the receptions, but Tate was really important in influencing the two high safety shell that Tennessee was playing. All three of the receivers working together to influence those safeties to pull them away from Jeremiah Smith and Egbuka to get those vertical shots was huge. And the offensive line played really, really well. They were still rotating the guards. And the other thing I think they were doing intentionally, instead of running right at the strength of the defensive line the way they did against Michigan, they were trying to get them moving more. And so a lot of that, the pre-snap motions and then misdirection counter, pin and pull, zone blocking, they got those guys on skates. And clearly the conditions helped. I think we finally get to see some of these Southern teams coming north for these playoff games, and that's the first game Ohio State's ever hosted in December. And you could certainly see by the injury toll it was taken on Tennessee, it affected them a lot more than it affected Ohio State. But even that said, like it was that confluence of all of those things working together, and we finally got to see a complete game where it seemed like they were schemed up. The game plan that Knowles had for Tennessee's offense. We know Tennessee has a very hard offense to scheme for, but they basically dared Tennessee to run the ball, and Tennessee couldn't do it. Even when they had 5 guys in the box, Tennessee could not run the ball. So they took the RPO game away and they completely stymied them. And it was just one of those deals where, the threat with Ohio State has always been under Ryan Day is those avalanche quarters where you give up like 21, 28, and all of a sudden a close game gets out of hand. But they hadn't really had, with the exception of the Indiana game where it was special teams that did it, they really hadn't had one of those games where it was, offense gets a score, defense gets a stop, offense gets a score, defense gets a stop, offense gets a score. Game is over. And then even when Tennessee kind of clawed back in the second quarter, they said it going into the half. They had to get their adjustments. Jim Knowles said in the post-game press conference, he chewed their ass at halftime to come out fired up. And that team destroyed Tennessee in the first 5 minutes of the third quarter, and that game was over. Like, it was so nice to see that kind of a complete game. And the fun, in a way, I feel bad for Oregon because Oregon went undefeated, won the Big Ten, and your reward is you catch an Ohio State team that's probably going to be playing with the most confidence they've played all season long, coming to play you in the first round when Penn State gets Boise State and Texas gets Arizona State. It's just like, gee,
Yeah, it's a combination,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Like, so like the losers of the Big Ten and the SEC have the by far more favorable draw, and it's just complete nonsense.
You said that, Matt. Yeah, I mean, to your credit, you said that a couple weeks ago. You're like, I'd rather be the 5. I'd rather be where Penn State's sitting right now than Oregon.
Yeah, for sure. And think about, like, it's hard to beat a team 2 times in the same year too, right? I mean, Ohio State went to play at Oregon, barely lost, and now Ohio State's coming back for revenge. They've always got that kind of going for it. And
not only that,
going back to what you said, Brian, like, I don't know what happened in that Michigan game. I don't think it's explainable what happened to Ohio State in that game. I mean, you could have a perfect storm and everything, literally, like what happened, and Ohio State still should have won that game. I mean, it was Davis Warren at quarterback at Michigan. He threw for 62 yards and 2 picks. So I don't know how to explain the Michigan-Ohio State game.
It kind of reminded me in a way. It was different. It was obviously different circumstances, but it reminded me a little bit of the Big Ten championship game where, Penn State played with Oregon. Penn State could have beaten them if they had not just absolutely shot themselves in the foot to start that game. But, Drew Aller's interception that almost went for a pick 6 was like the one that Howard threw early. It's just, inexcusable in that situation. especially for a veteran quarterback, to put yourself in a position. And then, they kept, it's always been the same story with the Michigan game. We've talked about this year after year after year. It comes down to your red zone opportunities, because Michigan will let you move the ball. They let Ohio State move the ball, but they clamp down in the red zone. And if you look at Ohio State was the best red zone team in the country this year. And in Michigan, they were 2 of 4 scoring on their red zone opportunities. Like, that's the game right there.
Yeah.
The pick that Howard threw in the red zone is like, what are you doing, man? Like, you just need points there and you win the game. It's like you expect a freshman quarterback to make a mistake like that. But that's why I think they just play so tight, because it's like the world revolves around winning that game. Even when you play a Michigan team that had no business winning that game, that has had an awful season,
Yeah.
they won it. And like I said, to me, going into the season, it was a one game season for Michigan, and Michigan won their biggest game. You saw what that meant to Shamar Moore and that team after they won that game. And but Ohio State still has the national title to play for. And I don't even bother to listen to most Ohio State fans. I really don't, because like, they're the ones that we're talking about with Devin Brown in the transfer portal, that the backup quarterback, that we should be getting Julian Sayin reps this season. First of all, Julian Sayin has played like shit this season. He hasn't looked good at all. And you're playing to win a national title now. Like, I'm not worried about next year. We worry about next year in the spring. Like, we're trying to win a national title right now. If Devin Brown can stay and the team wants him to stay, let him stay. He came into that Michigan State game and threw a really important touchdown to Jeremiah Smith. Like, you need all hands on deck, because you're trying to win a national title right now.
Yeah, very true. It's right now. And what do you think with Ryan Day and the way the ups and downs he's had? Do you think there's a chance
Had a lot of
he
ups.
does good and a lot of ups? But do you think that if there's a chance that if he does good in the playoffs, goes deep, or even, like, heaven forbid, wins the national title, do you think there's a chance he might just say, forget it, I'm going to go Jim Harbaugh route and go to the NFL? Because those jobs will probably be available for someone like a Dan Lanning or a Ryan Day. If they go deep or win the national title. That's kind of been on my mind a little bit.
I haven't heard any rumors about that. But one thing I also wanted to get back to is you were talking about how we were feeling about the Michigan game, and I think that it's going to start changing more. Not really based off of this year, but going forward, because on a normal year, I'm guessing Michigan's going to be good enough to be one of the 12 teams to make the playoff most years. I would assume, unless everything falls apart. So that's going to make the game even less important, because we're just going to end up playing again in the playoffs, right?
Yeah, it's possible.
This year was more important because we didn't have a chance to get a rematch. But going forward, I'm guessing. I don't know about next year, but I think a lot of years they'll be both of us will be in the playoffs. So it's just going to be like, you're just going to like rest your starters because it doesn't even matter.
No, because look at the Oregon game this year.
Well, it depends. Because losing that game could potentially be better. I mean, Penn State.
Yeah, but I think you're playing to win it, and you're trying to win that. If you would have seen if you saw the importance of winning that conference to those Oregon players, like, I'm sure they weren't happy about the draw, but they were trying to win that conference. And it's important to do that, and it's important to beat your rival. So especially the way this is going to go, I do expect Ryan Day to be back. I don't think he's going to get fired, no matter what's going to happen, and unless he decides it's just better for his family to go. But his son's still playing high school ball here in the area, in the Columbus area. So I would assume he's not gonna leave, and they have every chance of. They said it. They're out to win this thing. They're thinking we're gonna win the next 4 games. That's what they were thinking when they were going into that Tennessee game. So, I don't think it's gonna. There was always that fear of like, oh, you expand the playoffs, it's gonna lessen the importance of the regular season. Has it? I thought this year was great. This year's been fantastic.
What happened to the offensive line for Ohio State? What happened between the Michigan game, where they looked like such trash, where they couldn't figure it out to finding a combination that actually worked. Because I know that there weren't the same person. It wasn't the same personnel as what was in the Michigan game. Like,
Well, I mean, the only
they
difference was
figured
that Luke
something out.
Montgomery came in. That was they basically played the same guys. The only difference was that Sierraville, when Luke Montgomery would come into left guard, they'd switch Sierraville to right guard. So they were rotating all three guards the way they said they were. I think that it was Ryan Day said it was execution. That was a big part of it. I think they've had 3 weeks to work on this, and they had a much better game plan. Like, they know they gotta empty the barrels now. Like, they can't play conservatively. I think they left a lot. Like, I think they thought, we don't need to show everything. We can beat Michigan, with a pretty vanilla game plan, because of how bad Michigan had been all year. I think this one was like, no, dude, we're coaching with all the chips are, they're all in now. So they had a scheme where they were not going to sit there and try to run right into the teeth of the interior line of Tennessee. They were going to move them around a lot, and they were a lot of constraints. Like, they went back to what Will Howard does really, really well, is he reads. He's a very good reader of the game. He's very good in the read option game. He's very good in the RPO game, and they use that to its full extent against Tennessee.
Yeah, and so who do you blame the most in that game against Michigan, though?
Well,
Like,
obviously, it's the game plan.
was it the offense or the defense, though?
No, I mean, I think the defense played when you see the stats and you see the score, the defense played well enough to win that game. But the offense was terrible in that game. And yes, I think the game plan was overly confident. It was very conservative, and Will Howard played like shit. And I don't care. You can have the greatest game plan in the world. If your quarterback doesn't execute the offense, good luck. And he played awful in that game. Awful.
Yes, but Michigan had Davis Warren, who I played just as bad, if not worse,
No, but
except
the
in
difference is
key
Ohio
points
State.
of the game.
Will Howard
I
gave
think
you
in
guys a
key points of the
touchdown.
game,
Will Howard
played worse.
Howard spotted you a touchdown. Howard spotted
True.
you a touchdown. And if that had not happened, Ohio State wins that game. Like, that was an awful interception in his own end that gave you guys a touchdown. Without that touchdown, Ohio State wins that game, even in an ugly game where they played like crap. The rest of the way, Michigan did nothing until the very, very last drive. And at that point, the offense had just hung their defense out to dry. They were tired. After Michigan had that long drive, Sawyer got the interception, and they immediately go 3 and out when Tate drops that what would have been a first down. It's just it was not good. Just not good.
The defensive line didn't rotate at all against Michigan either, which is another problem that people have been having a lot of the year.
No, and they immediately started that against Tennessee. I mean, Kenyatta Jackson was out there on the second. If he wasn't out there on the first play, he was out there on the second play. Like, they did a lot. They need to rotate more.
Yeah, it's unexplainable. That's the thing. That's what I keep coming back to with that Michigan game. Like, Ohio State could play just as bad as they ever could, but I still think they should have won that game. And that's probably what Ryan Day and Chip Kelly were thinking. Our quarterback's having the worst day of the year, throwing picks. Like, we're just gonna run the ball because we're gonna win. That's probably what they had in their head.
Nate,
it was inexplicable.
Nate, if Ohio State had Michigan's kicker, they win that game. I'm not even joking. I'm not even. I'm being deadly serious.
Kicker's insane, and he's coming back this next year too. By the way,
and our field goal kicker is trash. Like, that is the one thing that scares the crap out of me, is if Ohio State gets in a close game where they need a kick, I have zero confidence in fielding. Zero. Like, they were so bad.
That's the one good thing, though, about having a bad kicker. It forces Ryan Day to be even more aggressive.
Yeah.
So you aren't even allowed to even think about being conservative because your kicker can't make a.
I mean, they give him a 60-yard opportunity yesterday, and he missed it by like 11 yards. So
in the cold, like, what were they even?
That was a terrible idea.
Why not just go for Hail Mary at that situation? There's no chance he's getting close on that kick.
No, I mean, that kicker from Michigan was an absolute weapon, and Fielding missed two awful kicks, and even if it had come down to another opportunity, he would have missed another one. Like, it's just bad. And even the Oregon game, I know they were trying to play for a field goal, but I had no confidence he was going to hit it in that game.
That's why I'm not too
So,
upset about the ending of the Oregon game, because I don't think he would have made the kick.
yeah, I mean, it's Georgia all over again. Why can't we get a freaking kicker? I don't understand it. Like
Your
I
game plan has to be surrounded by like just protecting your kicker, from keeping your kicker from actually having to kick.
One of the other
Yeah,
things I
so-
wanted to get into was the matchups, like for the rest of the playoffs. If we want to get into potentially whether, I don't know anything about Arizona State, but whether it's Texas after Oregon and then maybe Penn State, Notre Dame, and Georgia. One of the interesting things is so much of this has to do with matchups, and there's not a lot of good secondaries out there outside of Notre Dame and Penn State. I mean, Georgia and Texas, I don't think that their secondaries are very good, especially Georgia. So, that I think that the teams that are going to give us bigger problems are people that have lockdown secondaries like Notre Dame.
Well, and the ability to ball control.
Tennessee had from what I was reading, had a
Yeah.
pretty porous secondary too.
Well, no, they had one of the best corners in the country. That guy that was on Jeremiah Smith had a 90 PFF grade. He was like,
Well, he was their
SEC.
best corner, that's for sure.
Yeah,
That's
and he
what
got
Jeremiah
smoked.
Smith is an absolute alien.
Yeah, he totally is. But why?
that was
I'm
the other thing.
wondering, why didn't they play the same
The Michigan
defense
game.
that
Hold on. Time out. The Michigan game. Here was the biggest issue I had with the Michigan game by far. It was coaching malpractice. That Jeremiah Smith did not have a single target in the second half.
Unbelievable.
All he did was either catch the ball or draw PIs in the first half, and we didn't throw it to him one time in the second half. Yeah, that's the part that I had a freaking problem with. So when they came out immediately, I mean, the first time they get in plus territory against Tennessee, they throw a fade to the end zone, touchdown. Like they decided right away, we're getting Jeremiah in the game, and the kid is just an absolute alien. Good luck to anybody trying to cover him one-on-one. You must roll coverage. You must.
That is bizarre because Ohio State went into that, like ended the half with a pass to Jeremiah Smith for a touchdown.
He was the whole
And
drive.
Michigan, to their credit, Michigan held Jeremiah Smith twice in the first half. And I remember at the time, because I was thinking Michigan was going to lose. At the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I was just impressed actually that Michigan's corners were in position to be able to hold. Because like and I agreed with both holds too. I was like, thank goodness you did that. Good job.
Oh
Well
yeah,
done.
no
Yuppie
doubt.
clap.
No doubt. Well, that's what's crazy is like I've said it multiple times this year. I will take Jeremiah Smith as a freshman over Marvin Harrison Jr. As a junior. Like we lose nothing. Like he's more dynamic than Marvin Harrison was last year, and Marvin Harrison was the first wide receiver taken in the draft. Like that's how good this kid is. He's unbelievable because he can do everything.
Yeah,
They put him on drags, he'll get first. He can house it. Put him on the screen, he can house it. Deep, he can house it. He's like Julio Jones or Randy Moss. Like he's that level of player. You have to get him involved.
So I'm officially starting the campaign for Michigan NIL to pay Jeremiah Smith to not play for the next 2 years. Stay out, young man. Protect yourself for the NFL. All you have to do is take that NIL money.
Pull the mic.
You
at
don't even
Parsons.
have to play. Just practice up. Like go out to stud for a little while. Just work out.
Isn't that a Michigan thing? That's a Michigan thing, Nate. That's not an Ohio State thing. That's a Will Johnson thing. That's not a Jeremiah Smith thing.
I think he should go the same way as Maurice Claret. I thought that young man made a good decision, challenging the NFL. But yeah,
I guarantee you, you're going to see a healthy dose of Jeremiah Smith come hell or high water against Oregon, and if they're able to beat Oregon, you're going to see him featured the rest of the way. I mean, he is an absolute number one. He's getting treated like it. He's getting schemed like it, and he forces defenses to account for him. If you put him one-on-one, especially in plus territory, you're just asking for your fade balls for touchdowns.
Well, so Michigan, the way they played defense. Now, granted, they had their defensive line rushing 4. They were able to get a lot of pressure on Will Howard.
That makes a huge difference.
A lot of teams can't do that.
No, it's a huge difference.
They did that and then played zone.
Yeah.
And they just played they double covered Jeremiah. I'm just really surprised that Tennessee didn't try to do something after he just like blew past them for touchdowns.
Not only that, but they were playing off coverage. And that's one thing I thought Michigan, to me, if you're going to play if you're going to double him, you've got to get somebody to try to get hands on him at closer to the line of scrimmage. You just can't give him free releases. And that was the thing. Like it wasn't, yeah, okay, everybody's going to get enamored with the fade touchdowns. But to me, there were 2 or 3 shallow drags and, quick outs that he was involved in that were just as impressive, because that's bread and butter stuff. That's a drive starter. That's a third down conversion. That's how you really get momentum in your offense. And you let Ryan Day and Chip Kelly's offense get going with, you get Will Howard in a rhythm, you're in big trouble. And that they finally started getting to the point where they could move the ball enough to start getting the run game. They were like almost throwing to open up the run. And once they started creating some conflict with the linebackers for Tennessee, it was all over, man. And you saw the 2 big runs out of Travion Henderson were kind of like that, where it was a lot of misdirection because they'd hit him with shallows and jets and screens and all kinds of stuff that had them moving sideline to sideline. And you have to worry about getting hit over the top, and it opened up creases underneath. And the running backs played their best games collectively. Quinshawn was great in short yardage, and Travion had 2 big runs. It was just, it all worked. And the rotation, I think the extra time practicing definitely helped that offensive line a lot. And, their defense is really, really good. I mean, their defense gives them a fighting chance to beat anybody on a given day.
Yeah, true.
They're scary.
So the Oregon game. So who do you think has the mental edge, I guess, in this game? Because I know Ohio State's going to have a mental edge because they're going to have revenge. They're going to want to get back at Oregon because they barely lost to them earlier this year. But Ohio State had this edge against Tennessee. A lot of the reason they did is because they just lost to Michigan. There was a lot of motivation to come out at home and just wreck Tennessee. But now after that's happened, that kind of tempers that enthusiasm a little bit for the next game. Just thinking about like how the ebbs and flows of football go and game to game.
I don't think very much though, because you're playing against the number 1 team in the country who beat you already. So like it's still going to be. I mean, even though we're favored by Vegas by a couple points, I still think a lot of people in the media are going to be picking Oregon, and it's it's pretty easy to get your guys up for a game that you lost.
Ohio State's a 2-point favorite right now.
Yeah,
and so. I know that gives a little bit of edge to Oregon because you the coaches and Dan Lanning's to say you just beat those guys and you're a 2-point dog. I mean there's going to be all kinds of head games going on. I'm just wondering. It's fascinating to think about who actually has the advantage there.
Oregon's a really good team. I was really impressed getting to watch that Big Ten title game in Indy. How good Gabriel really is. Like, he's a very veteran quarterback. He's extremely difficult to confuse. And Penn State threw a lot at him, and he consistently made good decisions. But styles make fights, right? And I think the big thing with this one is, like, when Ohio State played Tennessee, they made a decision on defense. We're going to make this quarterback, we're going to dare them to run the ball, and we're going to make this quarterback beat us with consistently good decision making. That kid couldn't do it. Gabriel can do it. Like, he's a very, very smart quarterback. But I will say this: the thing the reason that they beat Ohio State in Oregon is they hit all of their big plays. They hit all the big passes. They decided that no one had challenged Ohio State's corners one-on-one, and they knew that the book on Gabriel was he's a really good efficient passer, but he's not a great deep ball thrower. He hit all of his deep balls in that game against Ohio State.
I mean, it was basically just Burke. I mean, Burke gave up like 170 yards.
Oh, it's just horrendous. Horrendous.
It's almost impossible for them to repeat that because there's just no way. Like, they wouldn't. First of all, they wouldn't keep Burke. I don't know why they kept him out while he kept getting toasted. But if that happened again, they're just going to put in Matthews. They're not going to.
No, I agree. And Matthews played a lot against Tennessee too. But the way that they beat Penn State, it was really interesting. It was different. One, they ran the ball effectively. And when they got light boxes, they ran the ball. And then the second thing was 15. It was he just killed Penn State over the middle. Like he was so quick, and anytime that they opened up gaps underneath, he was just electric, and it was just automatic. It was so quick how and efficient the way that they were picking up third downs.
I don't know how we're
So
going to cover him. I'm really worried
no,
about that guy.
yeah, and that's the big thing to me is I think that they're going to have a similar game plan in that they're going to want a light box to try to stop Oregon's run game. And that is going to be the tail of the game right there. Like it's one of those things where if Oregon can run the ball and be balanced, it is going to be another one of those. Ohio State's going to have to outscore them. And if they can control the run game and hold that down, they've got a much better chance. But I will say, like, I think they'll be watching. Penn State did a pretty good job outside of that. They were down 28-10.
Yeah, what
in
happened
that
to
game.
Oregon's defense? Like Penn State is not an elite offense, and they were able.
Well, I'll
to
tell you
all
now.
over them.
What happened in that game was Drew Aller played his ass off in that game. Now that kid's been so impressive to me. He does not make enough of the easy plays consistently. But man, he made so many plays like climbing the pocket and finding guys late and making plays. And his receivers did not help him out. Ohio State's receivers are so much better than Penn State's receivers. It's not even funny. But Penn State also ran the ball for I think over 200 yards in that game.
Yeah, it's
So
really good.
yeah, they've got it. I think Oregon can be got, but they're a really good team and they do a lot of stuff scheme wise. They'll mix fronts and they'll mix coverages and they'll try to confuse you. And Howard's got to play really well. And I think they need to run the ball at least effectively enough to stay balanced. But it's crazy because really when you look at the field, one of the 3 or 4 teams I think can actually win this thing is going to be done in the quarterfinals because of this matchup. Like either one of these teams is national championship caliber. It's wild to me that one of these teams is going to be gone. And quite frankly, it could be the same thing with the Notre Dame Georgia game. I mean, clearly Georgia's not the same Georgia team they've been out of the last couple of years. Notre Dame's solid. I think they're a good team, but like you're going to see some really good teams, a couple really good teams go home after this round. It's just crazy. But this is a heavyweight title fight in the quarters between Oregon and Ohio State.
Yeah, true.
Yes,
Matt, is that in Guinness you're drinking?
Yep.
Yeah.
You can't
Brian,
see
good
mine.
odds.
I'm actually drinking a Michigan beer right now, but you can't see me. So I'm
A
drinking
Michigan beer. What's that?
I'm drinking a Bell's Expedition Stout. It's a fantastic beer.
I thought this was gonna be like a Michigan hater type of thing or something.
No, I mean Michigan's got
you were
good
totally
beer.
serious.
Yeah, Michigan's got some great breweries.
Oh heck yeah, they do.
Yeah.
So real quick though, so in the first game, Ohio State was favored against Oregon, I remember. And Oregon had kind of gone down. Like everyone thought they were going to be really good at the beginning of the season, but Oregon actually came out and was not very good at the beginning of this earlier in this year. It was really after they beat Ohio State is when they got better. Like it feels like Oregon has really taken a nice step up since the beginning of the year. Ohio State was really good. Then they went on a lull, lost to Michigan. Now Ohio State's gotten their groove back. So I feel like both teams are like at the top level right now, and they're going to be hitting heads. So
I don't think the Oregon defense is playing elite right now, though. I mean,
not against.
We destroyed their running backs, and they ran wild on Oregon. I don't know.
No, it's true. I mean, I was blown away. I was actually I was sitting amongst a whole bunch of Penn State fans, and I was the one screaming, "Run the damn ball!"
Yeah.
They were every time they ran the ball, and they finally started doing it, and they just marched right down the field and stuck it right in the end zone. It's like they were blowing Oregon off the ball.
We might do the Michigan game plan against Oregon, and it might work.
Yeah, I mean,
wasn't Oregon missing their best defensive end? Though?
Yeah. Well, he was back against Penn State. He wasn't there against us.
That's true, and I think Ohio State's going to have to keep the momentum going on their offensive line. That's going to be so key.
Plus, if you look at the first game, so we had a Judkins fumble. We had a Judkins fumble, and we had.
Well, we also got bailed out by the Kazmarek should have been an interception catch that led to a score on the first drive. But I mean,
Then they also
the
had
one John Jenkins,
the onside kick too. Like, I mean,
the onside kick was crazy, and the the end of that game with the 12-men penalty and the offensive pass interference bullshit call on Jeremiah Smith. I mean,
it was a lot of stuff. And we had like 5 offsides because of the crowd noise.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, it was terrible.
There's a lot of advantages that, you know, I think are not going to be there.
There's a reason for Oregon to be very nervous about this game.
Yeah,
very nervous. I mean, Ohio State, I think, is the most talented team. I still believe they're the most talented team in the country. And if they're playing like that with a chip on their shoulder and some confidence, you have to worry about them. It's not to say they're perfect. They're not. And we've said from the very beginning that, you know, the offensive line's been a question mark from the start, and they lost their 2 best offensive linemen. But that, you know, the one thing is that they lost Simmons early in the season in the Oregon game. They lost McLaughlin, you know, long enough ago that they've been able to start to work some other guys in and get a better game, get a better feel for what your guys can do and can't do. You know, it's like, yeah, I get when coaches say like next man up, but sometimes you have to adjust your scheme to the skill set of the guys you actually have. And like one guy may be really much better at zone blocking than gap scheme or whatever. So you can't ask them to just jump right in there, and offensive line in particular, those guys have to have some continuity. So it's still an issue for me, but to me, I just think so much of this season has rested on the decision making and the playmaking of Will Howard. And if Howard's going to play at the level he played against Tennessee, Ohio State is going to be extremely hard to beat. Just point blank.
I think we should, before we end this tonight, I think we should just do our score picks. As far as Howard goes, yeah. I mean, you wonder if he can win a close game. I mean, he can win these games where they blow teams out and he plays awesome. But when the game is on the line and you're down by 3 or you're up by 2 and you need to keep the ball go, you know, how is Howard going to actually perform? That was one of my question marks about him when he was first coming in. But he's played so much better overall than I thought he would. Then man, we don't even need to talk about the Michigan game because again, that's unexplainable. But yeah, I mean, we definitely need to come back to the picks. But let's talk about Kirk Herbstreit and the backlash right now that Ohio State fans are seeing. And I'm a Michigan guy. I mean, I don't completely understand. I can't grasp or really understand why there's so much vitriol for what he said. It was kind of shitty what he said, but I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, because it sounds like he was being overcritical. He was getting down on the fans for being upset with Ryan Day. And then he kind of like dunked basically on all Buckeye fans right after Ohio State beat Tennessee. Like, what's going on with that? Matt, why don't you start with that? Because you're an emotionally charged up Buckeye fan. I need to understand that.
So there's been problems with Ohio State fans in Herbstreit for a long time. I can't remember how long ago it used to be. I mean, he used to live in Upper Arlington, and then I think he'd always come across to me like, when he's not doing Ohio State games, I always thought he's, you know, one of the best in the business. He's just an absolute fantastic caller of the games. I don't always agree with his analysis, like when he's on ESPN talking about selections and stuff, because, you know, he's just a, you know, corporate shill for ESPN and propping up SEC teams. But before all that happened, like, I felt like he was going too far the other way to make himself seem like he was not an Ohio State homer. Basically like the opposite of Desmond Howard, where he's just like a huge homer for everything Michigan, right? And so he was trying so hard not to be called a homer that he was sort of being negative a lot during calling a lot of the Ohio State games. And I remember he even made that comment one time, why would any wide receiver want to come play for Ohio State right now? But that was during the Tressel years. So it's been a while, back before we were throwing it with Ryan Day. But since then, you know, last year, all the Florida State fans were hating him because he was basically doing an infomercial for why Florida State shouldn't be in the playoffs last year. And so all the Florida State fans were like super pissed off at him. And then this year, you know, he's just basically not just him, but a lot of people on ESPN they were just going crazy about how, Indiana lost. I mean, they only lost by 10. I mean, granted, some of those were late points, but they only lost by 10 to Notre Dame, and then Penn State blew out SMU. So they were just like, these teams did not deserve it. The SEC had 3 teams that were clearly better than any of these 3 teams, and they would have done better than Indiana. And then during the broadcast itself, he was talking about how these Tennessee fans were traveling really well, and there's like 50,000 people that have made it here from Tennessee, and even Fowler was calling them out for that. And then throughout the game, he was, it seemed like he was waiting for Tennessee to do something good, and he wasn't really able to, say too many nice things about Ohio State. And then when the game was pretty much over at the end of the third quarter, and until the end of the game, he was just sort of, bashing Ohio State fans and saying how, like 20% of the fans are the lunatic fringe, and they're crazy, and they have unrealistic expectations, and like, obviously there are some people that are lunatics in every fan base, and we have a big fan base, so there's going to be more in ours than in some of the smaller bases. But, to basically just bash the fans like that, saying it's that many, it's just absurd. And like, there's a legitimate reason for the fans to be upset. It's like, I mean, if you lose to Michigan, you lose to your rival 4 years in a row, especially this year when you're 21-point favorites, there's a reason, you have a good reason to be mad and wanting him to be fired if he doesn't turn things around. So that's a completely reasonable opinion, and it's certainly not a fringe opinion like he was, making it out to be. So it's, it's just sort of a combination of, I've been also noticing tons of other fans of other schools are even be like, oh, now we understand what you're talking about. How he is such a homer for the SEC schools and stuff. And, it's just interesting on whether or not you think that it should be the most deserving teams versus the best teams. And, at a certain point, you do, it does matter who you play, but if you're going to just give people spots based off power rankings, then the games just don't really matter at a certain point. I mean, obviously there's a little nuance to it, but you can't just say, okay, well, Alabama would win on a neutral field. They would be favored over Indiana by 7 points, so we should give them the spot. And we're just going to ignore who you lose to, and that's the other thing. So it's so hard to figure out. So what's more important? Indiana did not have a top 25 win. Neither did Texas, by the way. And Indiana had one bad loss, one blowout loss, but it was, to Ohio State, which is a good team, whereas Alabama had 3 losses. One of them was to Vandy, and another one was to Oklahoma, and that one was 21-3. I mean, they got blown out. I mean, when you get 3 points, I think you should just be that alone. If you ever score 3 points in a game, you should be eliminated from the playoff on that alone, in my opinion. I think if we got 3 points in a game like that, I would not be like, pounding the table to say we deserve to be in the playoffs. It's just kind of crazy talk to me. But I mean, it's like one of the worst Alabama teams. They're just so inconsistent because, they have really good wins, beating Georgia, but then, they have all these terrible losses too. So like, how do you determine what's more important, beating good people versus, bad losses? Like, how do you weigh those two things? And then I was also comparing it to back in 2017 when Ohio State was going up against Alabama for the 4th spot in the playoff that year. And Ohio State had 2 losses. One of them was a bad loss to Iowa, where we got blown out, similar to how it was a worse blowout than the Oklahoma-Bama blowout, but it was still a blowout to a bad team. A little bit better than Oklahoma, but a bad team. And so Kirk Herbstreit was on ESPN that year, during the selection conference before the picks, and he was saying, well, wins have to matter, right? I mean, Alabama, after all, is 11-1, and Ohio State's 10-2. Like, the wins have to matter, even though Ohio State had more higher ranked wins than Alabama did that year. We had 2 better wins than they did, but then we had 2 losses, one to Purdue and I think Iowa and Purdue, I think, that year. And so we had 2 bad losses, but we had 2 better wins. And it's just whether or not Bama was the right choice is sort of irrelevant. It's just the point of what are you going to say is the reasoning, right? Is it more wins or is it not? I mean, just be consistent on what it is. And that's sort of like my problem with the playoff committee in general, because, you have all sorts of different things that they add in every year, whether it's like game control, strength of record, strength of schedule, just random things that they, who had the worst loss, who had the most top 25 wins, who had the most top 10 wins. Like, it just, okay. So what actually matters?
Matt, you had a lot on your mind.
Yeah.
This has been pent up frustration against Kirk Herbstreit for a long time. I hope you feel better. I hope you feel better. Brian, do you feel that same way? I mean, is that the angst with Kirk Herbstreit? He is kind of like going overboard, I guess, to be, not a homer, I guess. I mean, Howard and who else? Like Woodson. Those guys are going to pick Michigan every single time. They don't care about that. They've got different roles though than
Woodson's
Herbstreit.
Actually smart, and he's he's actually good at his job. Howard is a clown.
I can't even tell you the last time I watched College Game Day. I think it's a joke. I mean, putting McAfee on there, putting those guys, Howard still has a job. Like, I don't give a shit what they think. I don't give a shit what any of them think. The only one that matters to me, the only guy whose opinion that matters to me is Nick Saban's, because he's actually been there, and he's, the guy. You want to know the truth about the state of college football? Listen to Nick Saban. I don't give a shit about any of those other guys.
I love the Saban analysis. It's so
and I'm telling you right now, I watched that game with the sound on about 5. I think Fowler is trash as a play-by-play caller. I think Herbstreit is marginal at best as a color guy. He hasn't played in so long. You get nothing schematically. You get nothing. And I don't give a shit about his opinions. I mean, okay, that was kind of cool that he was there for senior tackle. That was about the only interesting story that he told the whole time. And his whole take on, it's unfair. I think it's shitty that people dox, Ryan Day's address and freaking make threats against him and shit like that. Yeah, it sucks. But, high expectations are what you sign up for if you take a job like this. So you have to beat the rival. If you don't beat the rival for basically 5 years, although the first one they ducked you, it doesn't matter. They count it. It matters. And he knows it matters. But I love that Saban said, you don't think he wants to win more than any of you guys? They're living this every day, trying to figure out how to win these games. And they still have a chance to win the title. So get your shit together and root for your team. And when Saban called out the fan base, that's the only thing that mattered to me. I don't give a shit about Kirk Herbstreit and his both sidesism. He's tried to have it both ways forever. I don't care about him. So I don't care about the talking heads.
Brian, my point would be to you, it's not whether or not you care. It's how much influence he and his network have on influencing everyone else.
Again, I've got limited bandwidth in my life, man, to worry about how much influence ESPN has in this thing. If ESPN had their way, Alabama would have been in it, but they didn't get picked. In fact, there were 2 ACC teams, and everybody with eyeballs knew the ACC was fucking garbage this year. SMU was not good. Clemson was not good. Miami had a horrible loss at the end of the year. There would have been 1 ACC team if Miami had gotten in the ACC championship, because anybody who was in the championship was going to beat SMU. SMU shouldn't have been in the playoff. They should have been in the playoff. They were not that good, but you know what? They beat everybody. So fine, because you know what? Here's the truth. The truth of the matter was, when the playoffs expanded, I was the happiest person in the world as an Ohio State fan. Do you want to know why? Because even in a bad year, Ohio State's going to be in the playoff, and they're going to have a chance to win the national title because they're always going to have talent. These games were always going to suck because the 12 seed and the 10 seed and the 9 seed, these teams are not very good. They're never going to be very good. It's not college basketball. There's not that much parity. When you have NIL and you have the ability to recruit and develop NFL talent, there are teams. I mean, when Indiana played at Ohio State, Urban Meyer in the pregame show said, I was watching warmups. There's quite a size disadvantage here. Like that tells you, yeah, okay, you might be able to play with the team. Like my dad played for Indiana in the 60s. He always said Indiana could play with Ohio State for about 3 quarters. but eventually the depth would just wear on you and you just lose. Like football is a different sport, man. Everybody knew this year that there were really only about, maybe if you squinted real hard, maybe 6 teams who could win the whole thing. I think it's more like 4. And you want to expand the playoffs? Great. That's awesome. It's great storylines, but don't expect those first round games to be competitive. Don't expect 2 of these games in the quarterfinals to be competitive. They're not going to be.
I mean, there's a lot of uncompetitive games in the 4-team playoffs over the years.
Well, like you said, Alabama went and got smoked. There are a lot of games where you're like, when you're very average teams, it's like the NFL. The NFL's weird because most teams in the middle cannot win road games. So you get these weird scores. Like you get a team that's like 8-2, but they go play a team that's 6-6 and get their asses kicked, or whatever. Like it's because they're really not that good. In college football this year, I mean, most years, there's maybe like 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 teams that have a legit shot to win a title at the beginning of the season. You need luck, you need health, you need games to go your way. And now all this is done for all the smaller school supporters that wanted this. All it's done is increase the margin for error for teams like Ohio State. Ohio State was a 2-loss team in the 4-team playoff. They probably wouldn't have even been in it, but now we're in it, and now we got a chance to win it, and everybody got to see that. So you catch your the win in your sails at the right time, and a team can win the whole thing. But that wasn't going to happen for Tennessee. Tennessee wasn't that good. They weren't. Like they're an okay football team, but that's ultimately what happened. Is they were a 3rd or 4th best team in the SEC. The SEC was not particularly good this year. The Big Ten's pretty darn good this year. And then you add Notre Dame in, like the best teams really in this whole thing were all northern teams this year. It's weird. It's a weird year that way. But
I don't understand how Notre Dame lost to NIU. That's still boggles.
No, I mean, but
unexplainable, just like the Michigan-Ohio State game.
I mean, Notre Dame has been blowing out everyone.
But who has Notre Dame beaten? That's the one thing that I have my question.
NIU is nothing special. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying
Texas A&M was, they squeaked out a win early in the season against Texas A&M. Texas A&M wasn't even good. So, I'm just gonna say, I think the team that's the best, to me, the hottest team in the SEC that nobody really would want to face was South Carolina, and they didn't make it. So I'm dead serious. Like that's a team I would not have wanted to play South Carolina. I would much rather play Tennessee than South Carolina.
Their quarterback was amazing as a runner.
And they had an unbelievable pass rush. That team, but it still does matter. You still have to win. You still have to stack up games. But this helped Ohio. This helped the Ohio States of the world more than it helped small schools. So you can bitch about it all you want to. I don't give a shit who the number 12 team is. It doesn't matter. They're going to get smoked in the first round anyway. Now it gets serious.
But now, like you're saying though, like as Joel Klatt was actually saying, like the playoff committee is pretending that all conferences are created equal. And they're just not. Like, that's why we have an SMU in there. And I don't know. We'll see how Boise State plays against Penn State. But that's
I don't think so. I don't believe. No, I don't believe.
I would rather see Ole Miss in here.
I don't believe. No, Ole Miss had a cupcake schedule and they screwed it up. They screwed themselves. They had a roster that was capable of going deep into this playoff, and they played like shit most of the year. You don't lose to Kentucky. You don't lose these games you should have won. It's ridiculous. But I'm telling you, like the committee wanted Alabama in this thing because they put them at 11. Because they figured that there was no way Miami was going to lose that last game of the season, and they did. Miami losing screwed the whole thing up because it basically put Clemson and SMU in. And anybody with eyeballs, I said on one of our previous shows, I thought there was going to be one ACC team, one Big 12 team, and one group of 5. That's what I thought.
Clemson too. Like I was really surprised that
trash. They were trash this year.
Yeah.
And they were still ranked 15. They were still ranked 15.
No, but if SMU would have beat Clemson, then Alabama would have also been in. So it was really lucky.
It was really lucky. It was extremely lucky for Clemson, and Clemson just happened to be, because they won their conference, they had to get in. So there was no way to not put them in. But Clemson didn't deserve to be in there. And what's crazy is they were the most competitive of all the first round games with Texas. Because again, I think Texas is kind of fraudulent too. They haven't played anybody. So, it's going to be really interesting to see. But I mean, it doesn't even really get serious until this round.
Yeah,
And even then,
Texas
we got a
hasn't
couple.
beaten anyone, right?
No,
Like that's the issues. They've played Georgia twice. They've lost to Georgia twice.
they lost to
They haven't
Georgia
beaten
without a
anyone.
quarterback. They
Yeah.
literally didn't have a quarterback, and Georgia still beat them.
Yeah, it's funny. All the Georgia
Crazy.
fans are actually happy about their new quarterback. That's how much they must be like really upset with how bad. Well, it wasn't always bad. Like Beck was really up and down. Like so, he was either really good
But when
or
he was
bad.
but when he was really good, he actually carried them in some games. What they don't want to talk about at Georgia is Georgia can't run the football. Like Georgia can't run, and their defense can be
line has been
exploited
really
too.
bad too.
Really bad. Like Carson Beck gets a lot of slander. I would love to have Carson Beck as a quarterback because that dude carried Georgia in some games. He brought him back in some games. That probably should have been about a 4-loss Georgia team this year. That is not the Georgia we're used to. I would not be surprised at all if Notre Dame beats them. Like, not at all.
Richie Dubs, he's right about a lot of things. He's not right about everything, though. Not everything. Can't give Brian a big head.
Appreciate you, Richie. You're my guy.
Losing to a team with no.
Was that your wife signing in, Brian?
Yeah, it's my burner account.
Is that your mother?
That's my burner.
That's awesome. All right, guys. Hey, real quick, let's talk about scores for Ohio State this weekend versus Oregon. So this is the biggest game. I feel like this might be the national championship game. So, what do you guys think, Matt? Let's start with you.
Oh, score prediction.
Score prediction. Are you ready?
Shoot. I didn't even think about a score, but I'm guessing there's going to be a decent amount of points. I wonder what the over/under is. I haven't checked. I'm guessing it's probably close to 60. Man, maybe 55 or 57. I'm guessing what the over/under is probably. Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably going to be somewhere around like Ohio State winning like 35-31 or something.
35-31. You're picking the Buckeyes?
Yep.
I'm shocked. Brian, what are you thinking?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that really helps an offensive line that's a little questionable is in the playoffs, they never call holding. Like you have to basically tackle people to get a holding call. So that helps a depleted offensive line. But I still think
Good point.
I'm just not ready to write off Oregon. I just feel like they've got so much momentum and they've cleaned Ohio State's clock on the field, in recruiting. They just have a vibe about them. I hope Ohio State wins with every fiber of my being. But if I had to pick the score, I'd go something like, I don't know, 31-28 Oregon, because it's just one of those games where, can a Ryan Day led team score more than 30? Because I think it's a race to 30 in a big game, and it's been a minute. It's been a minute.
So
but I would take Oregon.
You think we're going to make a field goal?
Yeah, but it's probably when we should have got.
Think about your score.
Yeah, you might want to revise that.
Think about your score.
Well,
I can see it going either way, but I don't think there's going to be a field goal in our future.
Yeah, I just we'll see. But if I had a gun to my head, I would say Oregon wins. But I look, I have way more confidence today, and it's not just. I'm trying not to let it be recency bias, but I like Ohio State when the expectations are not on them. Like the Georgia game. When going back to the run with Urban Meyer, like I just always feel like that, it's something about the Michigan game where they play super tight, and I hope that they can come out loose and really hit Oregon in the mouth, because that was the one thing in the Tennessee game from the jump. The more physical team was Ohio State. Like there was no
They
question
were
about that.
super physical. Like we were breaking their helmets. The
Yeah.
quarterback broke his helmet twice, and their guys we were just destroying them.
Anybody wearing a Vicus helmet in the cold is asking to get their brain destroyed. Like that was so bad for their marketing. Like first you get Mahomes, then you get this kid breaking 2 of those helmets in the cold. Like it's
Dude.
wild. But yeah, that I mean it's that if I don't know, man. Part of me is like I think this defense could just show up and just shut them down. But it's just so hard to tell, what team are you going to
The
get?
problem is their
And
offensive line is so good. I just, I hope we can get pressure on them. But after watching the first game, like that was the big thing. Like we could not get any pressure.
well, but it is a different deal. I do think that the Oregon, I think glad you brought that up because that was actually one thing I wanted to talk about when we were talking about it earlier, is do not underestimate what the Oregon game did for Jim Knowles and that defense.
I hope so.
They have changed their scheme quite a bit since that. And I think that they've kind of gone away from that tried and true Larry Johnson, like, hey, my 4 down linemen are going to get pressure. Because we've seen more odd front, we've seen more of the jack position, we've seen more simulated pressures, we've seen more blitzing. The only reason we didn't see it against Tennessee is because Tennessee runs that wonky spread where they got guys so far out that Ohio State was like, look, we're just going to get pressure with 4. And in some cases, they were only rushing 3. But that won't happen against Oregon. You can't do that. You cannot let Gabriel sit in the pocket. He will shred you.
Yeah, then even when we did get pressure on him, he was still able to evade it. So
he's so good. I mean, that guy, he is so impressive. And that's where, like, I've had this debate with several people, in the last few weeks. And it's like, man, if I'm actually coaching for my job, I would do exactly what Dan Lanning is doing. And that is going in the portal and get me the best, most seasoned quarterback I can get year in and year out. Like, screw going after the 5-star high school kid. I want a guy who's played like several thousand snaps. And it just makes a difference. Like you could just see the way those guys they are able to process things. They're so much harder to fool.
Did you see Duke just signed the UNLV quarterback for $4 million?
Wow, that's crazy.
I was like, Duke is spending money on football. I mean, $4 million. That's like more per year. It was an $8 million deal. So $4 million per, which is more than Michigan's 5-star quarterback is getting.
That's insane.
Yeah,
the NIL money, man. It's legit.
Recruiting money.
Crazy.
It is. All right, I'm going to give you my score prediction. So I'm saying 35-28 Oregon. And for the reasons that Brian, you were just saying, because it's the quarterback, and he's just so smart. He's just so good, so accurate, so smart. He evades the pressure. I think that the mind game might favor Oregon now just a little bit, even though I think it's really, really hard to beat a good team twice in the same year. Yeah. I think that Oregon might actually pull this out. So I think that's probably going to happen.
The other thing is
make sure that I'm 28. There are no field goals in there, right?
Yeah.
Right. I did that, right?
Yeah,
good. I'm glad I do the math on that.
I'm hoping we can get a little 2023 Dan Lanning where he gets a little bit too cute and goes for it. And, like against Washington both times, he was just being too cute, doing things that he didn't need to do, and it ended up costing him both times.
He must have learned that lesson this year.
I hate to say it because the last thing you want to do is talk about the refs, but I'm being deadly serious when I say that, like in the Tennessee game, they could have called some PIs early against Ohio State, and they didn't, and that makes a huge difference. If Ohio State, and I would be fully on board with the Bill Belichick philosophy of like, be aggressive early, make them call the flag, make them throw flags the entire game, because if they can get hands on the Oregon receivers, it is going to make a massive difference. Because Davis Igbinosun was amazing in the Tennessee game. But everybody knows he's handsy. He could, he was at the Indiana game. He had 6 penalties or something crazy like that. Like we all know, it really is like if they're not calling holding and they're not calling defensive holding or PIs, I think it favors Ohio State.
Ohio State, our opponents have not been called for a hold once the whole year.
Seriously? Is that really a stat?
Yeah.
No.
Oh my God.
You mean a hold? Okay,
Yep.
no, I'm trying to think Michigan had. No, I don't think Michigan was.
That's insane.
Not holding like on a receiver.
No, the
because
offensive
Michigan-
line, like the opposing
That's
offensive
clear.
line, has never been called for holding against our defensive line.
That is insane.
Yeah, and if you look at like penalties in general, like our opponents' penalties are like out of 100 and what is it, 125 teams, we're like 124th. Like our opponents are not getting penalties called on them.
That means that Ohio State's offensive line isn't even good enough to get held. That's terrible. That's
Jeremiah Smith has gotten a bunch of PIs, so that's all I care about.
That's awesome. All right, guys,
man.
We're gonna have to wrap this up right now. But yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone in the chat. Greatly appreciate it. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We greatly appreciate it. And boys, I'll just want to say, go blue.
Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.
Have a good one. Good night.
See you guys.